Israel's military says that it has found the bodies of 3 Israeli hostages in Gaza. Among them, the German-Israeli Shani Luk. Her body was seen in the back of a pickup truck in videos from the October 7th terrorist attack. She was later declared dead after skull fragments were found. A military spokesman said that the 3 hostages, that they were killed by Hamas at the Nova Music Festival, and then their bodies were taken across the border into Gaza. Here's more now from the Israeli spokesman earlier today.
They were celebrating life in the Nova Music Festival, and they were murdered by Hamas. Their bodies were transferred to medical professionals for forensic examination and identification. After the procedure was completed, we notified their families. Our hearts go out to them.
DW Special Correspondent Ibrahim in Jerusalem has more.
So we know that their remains were recovered in an overnight operation. That's according to the Israeli military spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, who we've also just heard from. Shani Luk, as you mentioned, a dual Israeli-German national. She had been presumed dead for a while now, as the Israeli military had previously found a part of her skull that was identified. But the other 2, a young woman in her late 20s and a man in his early 50s, there hadn't really been any signs of life from them since they were taken on October 7th. So, of course, there was some hope that they might be exchanged in a deal with Hamas, that they might be released or might be found. It's a devastating news for the families of the hostages, of course, but really for the entire country. This news coming this Shabbat afternoon as life here in Israel winds down for the day of rest. We've also heard from the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm just going to read to you the statement that they just put out. He said, "This terrible loss is heartbreaking, and that him and his wife Sarah are grieving." He also said that we will return all of our hostages, the living and the deceased alike. This is likely to cause more anger tomorrow in the weekly protests that have been taking place, calling on the Israeli government to reach a deal to return the hostages alive to their loved ones. And with this news, this is likely to cause a lot of anger tomorrow here in Israel.
Yeah, definitely the news that people in Israel did not want to hear this Friday. Our special correspondent, Ibrahim, in Jerusalem tonight. Thank you. Israel has rejected accusations that it is committing genocide in Gaza. It wrapped up its defense today at the International Court of Justice in The Hague. South Africa has asked the top UN court to order Israel to stop its offensive in Rafah. Now, this hearing this week is part of a broader case accusing Israel of committing genocide in Gaza, which Israel has repeatedly denied. Israel calls the case a distortion of reality. Lawyers representing South Africa made a series of allegations on Thursday, including accusing Israel of withholding humanitarian aid. Israel has denied doing that as well. Well, for more, I'm joined now by Michael Lynk. He is the former UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Palestinian territory. He's also an associate professor of law at the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario, Canada. Professor, it's good to see you again. I know you've been following what's going on in the court. South Africa and Israel, they've now presented their sides. In your professional opinion, which side delivered the most convincing argument?
Well, probably a good answer to your question is which side presented more independent expert evidence with respect to what they were claiming. South Africa on Thursday made arguments that Israel's genocide was continuing, that more stronger provisional measures were needed, and it relied upon, statements made by UN leaders and by international aid organizations that have been involved in trying to get aid into Gaza, and their pronouncements have been that there's a famine that's already broken out in the north of Gaza, where there are somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 Palestinians, and that it's very difficult to get aid into the south of Gaza, where 1.7 or 1.8 million Palestinians are huddled. Israel, in its arguments today, asserted that it was making remarkable efforts to improve aid delivery into Gaza, but it couldn't cite and didn't cite any of the UN statements or any of the international organization statements. And that's the kind of evidence that the court wants to hear, that there are reliable sources coming from, and particularly at the ICJ, coming from the United Nations, to be able to make a finding with respect to that. South Africa had that kind of evidence. Israel did not.
So let's take this into the next step. The judges will now deliberate on the request from South Africa. They're expected to issue a decision in the next few weeks. Let's assume they rule in favor of South Africa, that they grant this request. Can the ICJ really prevent any further Israeli military action in Gaza? I mean, is there any teeth to what the court decides?
Well, yes and no. Yes, the provisional measures that the court would wind up ordering are legally binding on all parties to the issue in front of them at the court. But you're absolutely right. The ICJ has no police, it has no army, it has no ability to issue warrants. It would be reliant upon the UN Security Council. And we know that Israel has a strong alliance with the United States, which has already issued 5 vetoes since the war began in October in defense of Israel. And even the one resolution which at the Security Council, which the United States allowed to go through, calling for a ceasefire during the weeks of Ramadan, Israel did not obey that resolution, and the United States and the Security Council took no steps to enforce it. But I should say that if the court does issue a provisional order demanding an immediate ceasefire, I mean, that would be a tremendous symbolic loss to Israel. It would further sink, I think, its already faltering international reputation in the international community regarding how it's conducted this war. So it has a certain symbolic importance, even if it can't be enforced militarily or politically.
And is that the power of the court, especially in this case? Because Israel has made it clear it's not planning to stop its offensive in Rafah anytime soon. So is it the symbolic meaning here that the world will be remembering?
Oh, I think it will be. I mean, when I think this war is finally over and we begin to look at who are the winners and losers, even if Israel is victorious militarily in terms of decapitating Hamas politically or militarily, its reputation will have taken a significant blow, I think, given the utter destruction that's occurred in Gaza and the huge loss of human life. Remember, Israel had an enormous amount of sympathy on its side in the first days and weeks after the terror attack on October 7th. But all of that has dissipated and more, and it can really, it is very hard to think of those few handful of countries who are still standing beside Israel after 7 months of this war.
Professor Michael Lynk, we appreciate your time and your valuable analysis tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.